Thank you, Mayor. And Jim will be queuing up here as well. I just wanted to make a few comments as we jump into the presentation here. And first, by just thanking Jim and the budget team and really all the departments for all the work that they've done. It's pretty unusual that we're having to go through a process of bringing down our budget by $45 million with only 2 months left in the year. But that just goes to show of kind of the crisis that we're in. I did want to just mention an action that we have taken outside the budget process because it's really an administrative issue, and I was going to report out under 3.1, but I think it fits better here. And so I just wanted to let the council know that we have been providing paid administrative leave since March 17th to all employees that have been unable to work. And the vast majority of our employees are working in some capacity or another, but there's some that have not been able to work for various reasons, and we've been paying administrative leave to that. And we've committed to doing that certainly through the current order that expires on the 3rd. So after a lot of thought and careful consideration, we've come to the decision that we're going to end administrative leave for part-time, unbenefited, and temporary employees. And so those are the part-time, unbenefited, and temporary employees that are not working and who haven't been reassigned to roles in the response. And so this is in essence a furlough for the unbenefited and temporary employees. And that furlough will begin on May 4th. And certainly there's always the opportunity to assign those or reassign those employees work should we need their support in terms of how our response continues. The fact that they're on furlough means that these employees are still going to be in our system. They're still considered city employees, and they will be exempted from any type of process to bring them back on. They're not going to have to reapply to continue to do work for the city in the future. And I just want to emphasize that administrative leave will be continued for further notice for all the full-time employees and part-time benefited employees. So just wanted to make sure the council was aware of that administrative action. So now we're going to jump into the presentation of the actions that we're proposing or that we take to address the revenue shortfall in the current year. And so this is really step one, if you will, to address significant revenue loss in the current year. There will be future steps that we will need to take in the proposed budget for next year, and that'll be coming very soon. I think the approach that we're taking is not an overreaction. We need to take these revenue shortfalls seriously. They are real, and we certainly cannot assume that we are going to be reimbursed for lost revenue, as we discussed earlier in the day. The recommendations that you're seeing come forward in this proposal are consistent with what we shared with the council in early April. And just once again, to emphasize the great job that Jim and the team have done in bringing this forward. I will acknowledge, though, that this is not our normal process, both in terms of having to take down the budget this much at this time of the year, but also the fact that our proposals and recommendations, although consistent with our previous discussions with council, only came out on Friday. And so I understand that the time frame is greatly compressed, and this is really over the weekend the first time that you're seeing the details on what we're proposing. So I understand that. I will tell you that it took a huge effort to get this out to the council by Friday, and as soon as we pushed send on the staff report, we immediately jumped over Saturday morning to working on the proposed budget. So not a lot of time for any of this work to be done. So I'll just end my part by saying this is step one in a process. And Jim is going to go through the details of what we're proposing to address the revenue shortfall for the current fiscal year. Jim?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. Jim Shannon, the city's budget director. Going to walk through what the recommendation has to rebalance the general fund with the expected impacts from COVID-19, as well as a few special and capital funds that are similarly impacted. See here, make sure I can get my slides to advance. So just a brief background, as Dave mentioned, back on April 7th, the council accepted a report that was describing the estimated impacts from COVID-19, and then also the approach that we would come forward with to rebalance 1920 and 2021. And we talked, a lot about how it's a sort of a shifting environment, and a lot of the old rules that we use to estimate revenues and the economy are kind of thrown out the window here because we're sort of in an unprecedented situation. But our best estimate currently is a $45 million shortfall for 1920, and a few other funds are also impacted as well. So our approach, as Dave mentioned, it was also consistent with how we had talked about it back in early April. On the expense side, we're looking to reduce or eliminate some existing expenditure appropriations, a significant chunk from personal services vacancy savings. So at the end of March, Dave had issued a memorandum to the organization implementing a hiring freeze that froze most positions except for some public safety, sworn and communications positions. And so there's a vacancy savings from that action, as well as the normal vacancy savings that we have been accruing throughout the year. Also looking to reduce those non-COVID-19 personal equipment expenditures that we can reduce. So that's going to generate some savings as well. Halting those citywide expenses and those general fund capital projects that hadn't yet started, that can be frozen, and then those savings taken. But we're also are considering what the impacts, especially in this short time frame that we have. Make sure that we're considering what those community impacts might be, as well as factoring in what our organizational capacity is, kind of given the environment that we're in right at the moment, and then our very real future budgetary constraints as well. So that was all kind of part of the decision making for how to reduce the expenditures for 1920. We also will step through a couple of different increases to a couple of different revenue categories. One related to the revenue capture agreement with eBay that we talked about the last time, as well as another transfer from another city fund related to the Hayes Mansion closeout. There's a little bit of extra revenue over there that we're going to bring back into the general fund to help solve our shortfall. And then we also evaluated the use of the various reserves that we have in the city to see which ones we could liquidate to help us solve our shortfall here. So high level for the sales stat for all of the revenue adjustments. We went over this in a little bit more detail back in April 7th, so we won't probably get into quite the weeds as much. But the biggest component here for our 45 million is the sales tax reductions, and this is going to be one of the it's certainly the largest, and it's also going to be the hardest to figure out because we get this data the latest. So although we get sales tax revenue on a monthly basis, we really get true ups on a quarterly basis, and that we get data with that tells us where we receive that revenue from and exactly how much it is per quarter. So we're not going to get the revenue data for January, February, March until toward the end of May, and then we're not going to get April, May, June, which is our most critical time, as you know. We're not going to get that until mid to late August. So that's kind of the uncertainty that we're dealing with here. But looking at a $27 million reduction in sales tax, which would drop us down year over year, or drop us down 10% from what the budget is. So that's that sales tax drop all in just a short amount of time, because sales tax was trending higher prior to this reduction. Pretty significantly impacted on the TOT tax as well. So the transient occupancy tax is a tax placed on hotel room nights. We also have some impacts related to TOT that's as part of some special funds. So some pretty significant reductions there, dropping that by a third from where it was previously budgeted at. Some impacts to our fees, rates, and charges. So because we're not able to do programming, we have some reductions for various fees that we won't be able to collect because we're not providing that service. And we have some smaller reductions here for utility tax, business taxes. Business taxes is a little bit smaller because we had actually been performing pretty well to date. And so a little bit of smaller reduction, although we are expecting a little bit of drop off here toward the end. And some fines, forfeitures and penalties, a lot of them related to parking fines. So that's sort of what we call like sort of the pure general fund reductions due to estimated due to the COVID-19 impacts. But they're also, we also are going to see some drops in revenue related to our development fee program. So although right now these are in the general fund, that's a fully cost recovery program. And so I kind of showed that here below the line a little bit just to kind of provide some visibility into that. So assuming a reduction of about 5.25 million in the development fee programs, that's mostly related to the planning program, which would be about 1.75 million, and the public works program, which is about 3.5 million. So in planning, we're looking to cover that with anticipated vacancies for personal services savings. And then the public works department looking to offset that again with a little bit of public service, personal services savings, along with using some of the reserves they have in that program. And so those are those components there. And then we're estimating $18 million in additional sales tax, sort of separate related to the revenue capture agreement with eBay. Again, we only have a quarter's worth of that data in hand, but thinking, kind of just based on the analysis that we've done, that we want to estimate an $18 million total revenue for the remainder of this fiscal year, which will help us. Again, we were waiting to receive that from the California Department of Tax and Finance Administration, CDTFA, if I got that right. And once we got that in late February and went through the process of evaluating it and making sure that it was there, felt good enough about recognizing that revenue to help solve our shortfall here. And then there's a $2.6 million amount, which, in last budget for the 1920 budget process had assumed, had used some of the one-time savings related to the Hayes Mansion sale to pay off both the debt related to Hayes and also pay down some other debt. We had intentionally set some money aside because the transition of the new owners and making sure that all of the liabilities were properly transitioned over to the new owners. And if there was any disagreements between parties about how those closeouts should work, we had intentionally left a $2.6 million reserve in the community facilities revenue fund. And now that we're almost through the end of this fiscal year and still feel good that we can transfer that $2.6 million into the general fund, which was always the intent for this funding. Just wanted to wait out that final transition cost. There's still a little bit of money left in Hayes, about $2 million in that Hayes Mansion Fund, just to make sure everything else is ironed out. But that's where we currently are at this point. So in total, all that together, the total revenue adjustments in the general fund are $29.7 million. And so here we are on the expense side. So we have a source of $29.65 million that we need to reduce by, and so we need to reduce the expenditures by that same amount. And so before I go down all through the list, I'll just point out here the development fee programs. You see the offsets there for the personal services side, or for the planning development fee program and the public works development fee program, taking down some of the personal services and a little bit of non-personal expenditures there, and then offsetting the rest of it by the reduction to the reserve. So that takes care of the development fee portion. And the other items on this list are sort of what the pure general fund components are. And we'll walk through these series of lists here, but the biggest component are the departmental expenses. And so these are the appropriations directly overseen by the department for the personal and non-personal equipment charges. We've got statewide expenses, which are generally multi-departmental in nature, for normally like specific projects that multiple departments collaborate on. We've got our capital contributions and expenses. We have some savings there. And I'll talk through what we're doing with our reserves to help us balance out. We're not yet needing to tap into the budget stabilization reserve, but we are able to be able to repurpose some other reserves to save that budget stabilization reserve for the future budget process. And then we do have a reduction in a transfer. So we had a transfer to a special fund, and after additional analysis, looks like we're not going to need that transfer after all, so we can pull that back into the general fund. So I'll talk about that as well. So for the departmental expenses, here is a listing. This is also shown in the memo of each department and what the total departmental savings are, both split up between personal services and non-personal equipment. As I said before, the bulk of this is related to personal services savings, vacancy savings, either attributed to the hiring freeze or for other vacancy savings that have occurred throughout the year. I'm sure council is aware that we do have a pretty high churn rate for our vacancies, so we always anticipate a certain level of vacancies. And so here we're taking the budget action to recognize those savings by reducing those department budgets by these amounts to make sure that we capture that savings on a budgetary basis. And similarly on the non-personal side, there's a mixture of general savings here, and then there are some specific there's a handful of specific actions that won't be able to go forward, or a few programs that will be halted because we're sort of really focusing on those COVID-related expenditures and minimizing all non-COVID costs. We're capturing that savings there on the non-personal side. So between the personal side, the non-personal side, that's a pretty good chunk. And then also as directed in that April 7th action, which was a memo from the mayor that was approved by the city council, for a contribution from the mayor and city council budgets as well. And so that totals $610,000, which includes $200,000 from the mayor's office budget and $40,000 from each council district office. So that's a proportional reduction, as well as I think about $10,000 reduction in the council general appropriation. So all total there is a $9.7 million reduction. So then the other different categories. And so, I think we've, feel good about the package that we're bringing forward here today has some minimal impacts to both the organization and the community, but it's not without impact. You just can't do that. So there's definitely things that are going to be felt here. So in the citywide expense category, we have savings of $7.8 million. I'll just talk through a few of the larger items here. The listing of all of these items are in the attachments to the memo. We'll list out each individual appropriation. And so one of them is the South San Jose Police Substation appropriation. This is $1.5 million that was previously set aside to help out start the activation of the police substation. This was a couple of years ago in a previous budget message. Shortly after this allocation was made, we had the Measure T measure had passed. And so as part of Measure T, there's funding for a new police training center, whereby once that is built, the training capacity that's currently at the substation would move out into that new police training facility, and then we'd be able to activate the substation for what its original intended use. And so what that $1.5 million really is set aside to help us with fixtures, furnishings, and equipment, or FF&E needs that will ultimately be needed for both the new training facility and to help activate the substation. So this funding is recommended to be taken down at this point because the police training facility is still a few years out, but we recognize that, to open that facility and to reactivate the substation, we're going to need to find probably this and even a little bit more in the future to open those back up. Workers' compensation savings of $1.3 million. So we're in looking at what the current trend is. I think our HR team has done an awesome job working with departments, working with bargaining groups to have a safer workforce and to be working on finding ways to reduce our compensation claims. So those items have been trending down. And so we're assuming a savings of about $1.3 million here. And then we have the San Jose 311 application where we have some savings. So this we went forward with a few of the functional upgrades for that project, including language. But we are recognizing the remaining savings, which is a $786,000 there. Move to the capital expense category of $4.1 million. The bulk of this is related to the emergency power generation for critical city facilities. This was a $5 million allocation that was done as part of the 18-19 annual report action. And so what this recommendation does here is that it preserves $2 million of that $5 million funding for the most critical facilities, but then does let go $3 million of that original allocation. And I think this is going to be a continued priority for us. So we're going to need to keep searching for one-time bits of money as we go forward the next couple of years, because energy resiliency is going to continue to be a key focus. But I think we have the top priorities will be using the remaining $2 million. There are a number of traffic safety projects totaling $609,000 in the that was a part of the last budget message, the 1920 June budget message, I believe. And those are being recommended because they were they didn't start yet this year, although there was work to get those going. We're recommending to take down the expense in the general fund, and those costs will be absorbed and prioritized into the traffic capital program in the neighborhood traffic calming section and the building and structure construction tax fund for those safety improvements. So hoping to carry on with the same level of service, just funded a little bit differently. And then the quiet zone, which was another large item in the message from last fiscal year. There is this study that is currently ongoing to identify the potential improvements for the quiet zone, but the funding available for those improvements would not be available with the action taken today. I think the administration will try to identify some other sources, but it will be more of a challenge going forward to implement the quiet zone. But again, we're still waiting to see what the study results of those are. And then the transfer, so we had transferred, and for a couple of years, we had been supporting, the general fund, had been supporting the self-insured medical fund, which was established because the previous plan offerings didn't have that type of PPO plan. So we had a self-insured fund that the general fund had to subsidize. And so with the new healthcare provider, we do have this fund will be closed out by the end of the calendar year, but so that won't be going forward, but also the previously anticipated claims that we had thought at the start of the year are coming in less. And so we think we don't need this subsidy transfer anymore. And so we can pull that back. And so we can recognize that as savings as well. And reserves. All right, so we have two different categories of reserves. So one of them are earmarked reserves that we're recommending to reduce by $9.3 million. And so these were previously set aside for other purposes that we're going to liquidate for our purposes here to solve our shortfall. The largest of which is the salaries and benefits reserve, which has we're recommending to take down by $5.1 million. This is an amount that was previously set aside in past years for potential payroll errors and for increases in health rates and management pay for performance that was set aside as part of the budgetary process, calculated and set aside only to be liquidated if needed. And so in some cases, the departments a lot of times are able to absorb some of those costs. And so we have the savings that we can recognize here to help offset our shortfall. We had set aside a city health plan restructuring reserve a couple of years ago. The current balance is $2 million. These were different ideas to help broaden or diversify how our employees choose our health plans. We've been doing a few of those efforts, and we've been able to absorb those costs within the departmental budgets. So this one we're recommending to take down by $1.9 million, leaving about $100,000 left. Sick leave payments upon retirements reserve. This is a reserve that we've been taking down over the number of years, little bit by little bit, as our liability for what the sick leave payout may be for those folks who are pending retirement in Tier 1, their sick leave payment payout. That liability is slowly coming down over the years as people are retiring. And so we are recommending to reduce this amount by $1 million. And then this last one on the slide here is Parks Rehab Strike Team of $745,000. This was a 3-year program that was initiated last year. So this is year 3 of it. That would have been in 21-22. And so this is a reserve that we're recommending to eliminate at this time. And then this one's a little complicated, so I apologize for the technicalese of this last one, but the 1920 ending fund balance reserve, you may remember back in mid-year, we had said that, hey, as part of our adopted budget process, we assume an ongoing ending fund balance of $23 million. And what that means is that even though we go forward and we budget really closely on the revenue side, we budget very closely on the expense side, we still know we're probably going to have some amount of extra revenue or some expenditure savings, and we want to capture that as fund balance. It helps us budget tighter. And so what we had assumed is we would have $23 million of a combination of excess revenues and expenditure savings as part of our budget balancing process. So if we don't hit that $23 million, that means that any shortfall will be carried forward into next year to make next year's deficit worse. And so what we said here is, okay, we want to make sure we kind of fill up that $23 million bucket and to make our next year's problem not worse. And so what this does is we had already set aside $10 million with 23 at mid-year. That $10 million is temporarily sort of on loan to the emergency reserve fund we used to sort of front load some costs related to our COVID response, but we expect that to be brought back in prior to the end of the fiscal year. So we need another 13 more million there to get us to the 23 million. We're only doing 8 because we're also assuming a savings of $5 million to liquidate old carryover encumbrances greater than 3 years that we want to capture as a savings. So that will ultimately offset what needs to be officially budgeted in that reserve. So hopefully that was followable. That's a tricky one. And then we do have a few special capital fund adjustments, and they're primarily are related to the impacts to our hotel and convention center community. So we have, of the transient occupancy tax, that's a 10% tax. For the 4 percentage points that goes to the general fund, and we got 6 percentage points of it goes to the special fund. And so we're recommending to take that down by a pretty significant amount, as we saw earlier. And so that will impact the 3 partners that by municipal code receive that funding. So it'll be a reduction to our cultural grants partners by 2.2 million, the CVB by 2.2 million, and then there will be a reduction of the transfer to the Convention and Cultural Affairs Fund by 4.4 million. So this is so that's the impact of what that TOT reduction will be. The good news is we do have some in all of these funds here. We do have some reserves and backups that we're helping to get us through this process. Including in our cultural grants program. So that will be helpful, but on a going forward basis, we're going to be very, very careful about how we budget and allocate funding. In the Convention and Cultural Affairs Fund, this is the fund that funds Team San Jose operations for our convention center facilities operations and our cultural facilities operations. What this does is this, because of the lack of events and the lack of conventions that are happening between the COVID shutdown through the end of the year, without that revenue coming in and hitting us so short and so late in the fiscal year, especially when we anticipate some pretty big events in the late spring, what this does is it's going to drive up the subsidy requirements for Team San Jose by $6.3 million for almost a little bit over about $11 million total subsidy, which is tough. And that's even with the Team San Jose going through the really tough choices that it's had to make over the past few weeks. That's offset a little bit. Again, we have some reserves in both the Convention and Cultural Affairs Fund and in the Convention and Cultural Affairs Capital Fund. We have revenue stabilization reserves and capital reserves that are helping us through this time. Similarly, in our Convention Center Facilities District Revenue Fund, another special tax that is placed on a large number of hotel rooms in the city. We have liquidating a reserve to help us through offset some of the shortfall there to make sure that we can make all of our debt service payments, which we feel that we can even going into the following year. So our foresight and council's foresight in setting aside some of these different reserves is helping us through these funds here. I'm almost done here. Evaluation follow-up. So we're going to continue monitoring our economic situation and the revenue impacts, all the way through the end of the fiscal year and beyond. Like I said, it's really difficult to see where we're going to be. We're going to do our best, and we're going to keep you updated as best as we can. We will have in June our March, April bi-monthly financial report. Again, that won't have sales tax data in it, but it will have some other revenue components there. And we will come forward with a recommendation on June 23rd to do the final true-ups for 1920, which we do every year to do. So it will be anything that we're learning new, plus any other shifts that we need to accommodate in accordance with our normal year-end actions. And so with that, I just want to say thank you for listening, and also a big, huge thank you to my team, who is just killing it out there at home. And so I really appreciate my leadership team that we have here and everybody that's not on the slide that hopefully is watching online for all of the stuff that you're doing to get us across the goal line here. And with that, I will stop talking.